All right. Welcome back to Fantasy Files 1054, everybody. This is going to be our 2022 tight end ranking video. We're going to do the top 12, so the first 12 off the board, or at least the first 12 that should go off the board in your redraft leagues or best ball leagues, whichever you wish to apply this to. But one thing we want to say, one thing before I get into that. If you haven't seen last week's video, it's the quarterback rankings. We went ahead and went through all 32 quarterbacks and ranked them. Didn't dive too deep into many of them, but the rankings stand true. And if you want to check that out, go ahead. The link will be at the end of the video. Getting into the tight ends, one thing we really do want to note is how important the tight end position is. It's kind of the boring position when we think about running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. Those are the far more exciting players. Those are the guys that a lot of people want to focus on, and as you should. But the one thing about the tight end position, and the reason why it's so important, is that there's only about 6 tight ends that are going to give you double-digit fantasy points on a weekly basis, and then there's probably only like 4, maybe 3 to 5. We'll call it 3 to 5 tight ends that will give you wide receiver-like production at the tight end position. And if you're one of those 4 or 5 teams in your league that has a tight end that's going to produce at a wide receiver level, when you go up against somebody that doesn't have one of those tight ends, you're going to have a huge advantage. Because let's just say you grab an elite tight end, 15 points a game, and they went through and grabbed someone later in the rounds because they were focused on wide receiver and running back, and they're producing about 5 points a game, which is definitely in the range of outcomes for tight ends, especially when you get below the top 15. And even the top 12 can really get you in that fantasy points per game range of 5 to 8 points. That means that when you play those drafters that do have the elite tight ends, you're going to have to make up 10 points in your running backs and wide receivers, and that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So this is a very important video, even though it might not be the most exciting. So let's just get right into it. Okay, the first player, not going to be a shocker. He's been averaging the number 1 tight end over the past, 5 years. He regressed a little bit last season, but we'll throw him up here because everyone knows who it is. Travis Kelce. Now, if we want to get the cons right out of the way, the arguments that are being used against him, he regressed a little bit last year. He regressed from the number 1 tight end, and he was on a 3-year streak of being the number 1 tight end, and he regressed all the way back to the number 2 tight end. And we'll get into why that happened a little bit. And there is some concern there, which, I did consider ranking the number 2 tight end over Travis Kelce just for some of these red flags. One, other than what we already mentioned, his yards per route run reduced from about 2.4, 2.5 to 2.07. He didn't score, or he didn't rack up 1,200 receiving yards for the first time since 2017. So slight regression because he regressed to 1,125. So nothing huge. He's still in the 1,100 range. But it is a slight regression, and it could be a sign of things to come, especially when you pair it with the fact that he is going on to 33 years old in October. So those are the red flags. Those are the arguments that you're going to hear against them. But let's get into why he's going to be the number 1 tight end on the season. And to kick it off, what we all know, Tyree Kill was traded to the Miami Dolphins. He accounted for 159 targets and 1,200 yards with 9 touchdowns. Byron Pringle, their number 4 receiving option overall, went to Chicago. That accounted for 60 targets. Darrell Williams, running back, went to Arizona. That accounted for 57 free targets. Demarcus Robinson went to Las Vegas Raiders. That accounted for 41 targets. So in total, quick math, that freed up 317 targets, 2,523 yards, and 19 touchdowns, okay? So obviously they brought in replacements, and that's not all going. Imagine if that went on to Travis Kelce, but that's not all going to Travis Kelce. But we'll do a little exercise here and a little hypothetical situation that will give us an idea of what that means for Travis Kelce. We'll look back at Juju Smith's last year that he played in 16 games in 2020 with the Steelers. He produced 831 yards and 9 touchdowns. So if we deduct that from the figures we just talked about, that was freed up with all of the turnover, I guess, in the wide receiver / running or receiving room. That takes us down from 2,523 yards to 1,692 being free, and from 19 touchdowns to 10. So if you take MVS and Sky Moore, they're not going to produce 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns. It's not going to happen. We might have MVS coming in and taking 800 of those yards, and Sky Moore taking about 400 yards. So we're looking at another 400 yards available and maybe 50 targets with 2 touchdowns available. So obviously, that isn't going to go to Travis Kelce either, but it allows Travis Kelce a little bit of breathing room to get back from his normal 1,400 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. That's his average over the 2018, 2019, 2020 season. It allows him to a little bit of breathing room in the offense to get back to where he is used to producing. And he is the only receiving option other than Mecole Hardman that Patrick Mahomes has rapport with and is comfortable with. So I'm looking for Travis Kelce to come back and retake the number 1 tight end position overall and show us why he is the best tight end of all time. One of the best tight ends of all time. We can't take Robert Gronkowski out of that. One more thing I want to put on your guys' radar, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. This is the guy that can produce at an elite wide receiver level as far as fantasy points goes. So if you look at this graphic, this is pretty wild. If we look at overall receiving from last year, his regressed year, his first number 2 tight end finish since 2017. So this is his worst year in 5 years. He finished behind Keenan Allen in receiving yards, ahead of Chris Godwin, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman. All wide receivers going in the second round. And sometimes you can get Travis Kelce fall into early second round. So if you can get a wide receiver production level in your tight end position, you have a huge advantage on those drafters that you're going to go up against in the season. And the other thing to note is that the graphic is for receiving yards, but he's a tight end, so he gets the red zone looks as well. So we're looking at 9 touchdowns as opposed to the average of 6 for wide receivers. So something to keep in mind, and that's all you should need to know on why taking Travis Kelce at around pick 13, 14 is going to be a good bet, and you should do it if you have the chance. The number 2 tight end overall also should come to no surprise. Finished as number 1 last year and will be in the same rank as Travis Kelce is Mark Andrews. Now, I had a difficult time putting him below Travis Kelce because in receiving total, if we take the same graphic that we just saw for Travis Kelce and apply it to Mark Andrews, he was the number 6 receiving option for as far as yards goes on the season, falling only behind Deebo Samuel, Jamar Chase, Davonte Adams, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and ahead of Stephon Diggs and Tyree Kill. So first round wide receiver production at the 20th pick overall. In the second, third, depending on what format your draft is, Mark Andrews is going far later, and you can get that high-level wide receiver production out of a tight end and plug him into your lineup. Now, the thing we do want to note is that, yes, the Ravens do have 91 or 147. I'm sorry, 91 receptions, but 140. I had the wrong thing highlighted at first, but 146 receptions are what went to Marquise Brown. He's going to the Arizona Cardinals. 1,008 yards and 6 touchdowns. So just like we analyze what is going to be new to Travis Kelce and what's going to be available for the taking, we do have Marquise Brown leaving and really no substantial receiving options coming into Baltimore. However, big but, and big thing to consider is due to the Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins injury, due to the defense being a shell of themselves due to injuries, the Ravens got absolutely obliterated with injuries last year. They had to pass the ball 611 times, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the ninth amount of attempts in the passing game overall. And we all know with Lamar Jackson, that is not the game plan that the Ravens are looking for. When they have the running backs back, they're going to revert to being the number one running offense on the season. And if we compare 611 attempts to when they had J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards just 1 year previous, they went from the ninth most passing attempts on their offense to dead last at 406. So my point is, if you take the overall pie, the overall amount of opportunities that Mark Andrews is going to have, you're going 205. You're taking 205 passing attempts away from him. So though he had an amazing season, though he was extremely efficient, and he compared to some of the best wide receivers in the game, he's not going to have the same opportunity this upcoming year because the Ravens are going to revert to being a running offense since they have all of their running options back. That is why we have Travis Kelce above Mark Andrews. Now, coming in at the A tier is going to be the young and now proven Kyle Pitts. The thing with Kyle Pitts is he was one of the best, if not the best, college tight end of all time. And we were looking for that type of production coming into his rookie season. And you may not know this because he finished the number 7 tight end overall last season. But Kyle Pitts, when his rookie season is compared to all rookie receiving seasons, tight ends, running backs, or wide receivers, Kyle Pitts was the number 22nd. He had the number 22nd amount of yards as a rookie of all time. And if you look at this list, there are players dating back to the 1950s. And we're talking about the players above him, just to mention some names: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Randy Moss, OBJ, Amari Cooper, A.J. Brown, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, all wide receivers, all very elite. And we're talking about Kyle Pitts coming in as a tight end and giving you 1,000 yards, 110 targets, 60 yards a game. And here's the caveat. And here's why he was ranked number 7th tight end overall last season, is because he had 1 touchdown. Now, the touchdown efficiency rate is one of the most volatile stats in the entire NFL, in the entire orb of fantasy football. And just like if you have an extremely efficient touchdown rate for a given year and you're due to regress, it goes the other way as well. If you have a very low efficiency, you most likely will do better than 1 touchdown this upcoming year. So even though he was 7th overall at the end of the year when it was all said and done, we are looking for him to take that step into the top 3 tight ends, even though he's going into a worse situation as far as quarterback play goes. He's going to be with Marcus Mariota as opposed to Matt Ryan, but he will be the number 1 or 2 receiving option on that team. And with the rookie year that he gave us last year and confirmed all of our suspicions, he will be looking to take the step this year. And again, we'll do a hypothetical here. If you take Kyle Pitts, 142.6 fantasy points on the season, and you compare it to, let's just say, 9 touchdowns, which is what players like. These are players that we expect Kyle Pitts to compare to by the end of this season. Mark Andrews had 9 touchdowns. Travis Kelce had 9 touchdowns. Dalton Schultz had 8. Dawson Knox had 9. So if we play the hypothetical game and give Kyle Pitts 9 touchdowns with the same amount of yards, targets, everything, you go from 142.6 fantasy points to 190.6 fantasy points. And if you account for him playing 17 games, that puts him at 11.21 fantasy points per game and puts him at the number 3 slot on the year last year. And that is before him going into year 2 and taking that step. So for all of those reasons, that is why Kyle Pitts is going to bump up above players that you probably expected to be at number 3, and why we expect him to take that step. And when you can get Kyle Pitts in the range of Courtland Sutton and Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, Ezekiel Elliott, and plug a wide receiver basically into your tight end position, that's a pick that we'll go and try to make every time if we can get him at the end of the 3rd round. So, moving on to the number 4 tight end overall, and we'll move down to the B tier for this one. Kyle Pitts will be the only tight end in tier A. We're going to move to George Kittle. Now, George Kittle is a tricky one, and he's a hard one to rank for. He has so many variables to the name, and a large reason on why I'm really not drafting George Kittle a whole lot. And that is because of availability. If we look back all the way to 2017, he's only gotten to 15 games played twice. And not only that, he's only gotten to 6 touchdowns once, and that was last year. In addition to all that, he's going into a new offense, a new situation with Trey Lance, which is going to take the passing production away a little bit. They're going to transition into a more rush-heavy offense and take some of his potential opportunities away. But when you put in all of that aside, George Kittle is one of the most efficient players in the league. He is operating at a 2.63 yards per route run, which is 0.6 over what Travis Kelce produced last year. So he's far more efficient as far as yards and receptions goes. He finished with 162 fantasy points in 14 games. And if you look at that compared to the number 3 tight end overall, Dalton Schultz from last year, he had 169.8 fantasy points in 17 games. In 3 more games, Dalton Schultz only produced 6 more fantasy points on the season. So it's a big if, it's a big but we have to do it. That's what we're doing here in this video. George Kittle, if he can get through 15, 16 games this season, he's going to be the number 4 tight end on the season. I mean, like I said, the hard part about George Kittle is his price. He's going at late 4th round, early 5th round area. And I really do like grabbing other players in that range, usually a quarterback. So I haven't been drafting a whole lot of George Kittle, but if you want to consider him, I think he's a great option, even with all of the variables we talked about. Behind George Kittle, and a lot of people want to rank him above George Kittle, but I just can't get there. We're going to go ahead and throw Darren Waller at the number 5th tight end overall. Okay, so George Kittle is a massive. He's a red zone target. And unfortunately, last year, he regressed a little bit from his 9 touchdowns in 2020. He regressed all the way to 2 touchdowns. Now, that was in 11 games, so he did play 5 fewer games than what we're used to. However, if you break that down just into a per-game stat and look at his receptions and his yards, they look solid. They look really good at 5 receptions a game. 60.5 yards per game. But, and the big kicker, is he only had a 3.6% touchdown efficiency last year. And the reason this is such a big deal is where tight ends shine is in the red zone. They're the big body that the quarterback is looking, especially when everyone's packed into the box within the 20-yard line. They're looking for their big targets, which is their tight ends. That's where they really shine. And when he's coming from a season, even though he only had 11 games, when he's coming from a season where he only scored 2 touchdowns without Davonte Adams, and then you bring Davonte Adams into the mix, Davonte Adams isn't a Henry Ruggs. He is also a red zone target, and he's the best red zone receiver aside from potentially Mike Evans in the league. So when you're bringing a target like that onto the team, you'd have to imagine his touchdown efficiency isn't going to skyrocket. Maybe he gets back to 5 touchdowns, but it's definitely going to take away from the looks in the red zone that he gets, which is why I bumped him down from 4 to 5. But the thing about Raiders this upcoming year is even though they're bringing in Davonte Adams, their target tree is going to be very limited. When you look at other players, and it's one of the reasons why Mark Andrews looked so good last year is because the target tree was limited. But if you, the same applies to Darren Waller, where Davonte Adams is coming in, but they're only going to be passing. Derek Carr's only going to be passing to Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, Davonte Adams, and Josh Jacobs, if you want to count that. They're not going to veer out too much as far as other targets goes. It's not going to be a Tom Brady situation where they're dishing the ball to everyone on the roster. They're going to stick pretty close to those 3 or 4 players. And Darren Waller last year had a 24% target share of the team. And this will regress a little bit, but even if it goes down to 20% on the season with Davonte Adams coming in, which I think is probably where it will go, there's still plenty of room for him to get all of his targets, all of his yards, and maybe take another step in the touchdown efficiency rating, because he did have 9 touchdowns in 2020. So if he splits the difference and goes to 5, he's still looking to be a very productive option for you at the tight end position, and probably where the drop-off starts from wide receiver productivity down to elite tight end productivity. And to kick us off in that range, we're going to go ahead and throw Dalton Schultz in at the first player on the C tier. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there thinking Dalton Schultz should be lower. There's probably a lot more of you out there thinking that Dalton Schultz should be higher because of Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson leaving 165 targets, 1,400 yards, and 14 touchdowns vacant, with only James Washington and Jalen Tolbert coming in to replace him, which obviously all of those targets are not going to those 2 players. That's why a lot of people are very high on Dalton Schultz this year. However, I don't think Dalton Schultz is the elite talent that a lot of people want to think he is. I think that Dalton Schultz is going to be in an excellent situation this year. He did finish last season as the number 3 tight end overall with 808 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 10 fantasy points per game. But like I said, I don't think he's the elite talent, and I think you're benefiting and banking on the opportunity that he has to carry him to be the number 6 tight end overall if all tight ends stay healthy throughout the season. So I think he's a fine player to take if you're betting on him getting to 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. But the problem is that the range he's being taken in, and if you want to look at Underdog Fantasy, he's being taken as the 70th overall pick. I haven't been taking him unless I have a Dak Prescott stack. I can't get there with him. I do like the opportunity, but I also like Michael Gallup a lot. I also like CeeDee Lamb a lot, and if you know much about the Cowboys offense, you will be, if you want to make the case for Dalton Schultz, you will be screaming off the rooftops that the pace of play of the Cowboys is absolutely excellent for fantasy as well. So, like I said, the opportunity is there for him, and the position that he's in is one of the best that you can ask for other than Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. but the talent is where my question lies. So I haven't been taking a whole lot of him because I think his ADP is very rich, but I do think that he is primed to have a top 6 tight end performance this year. Coming behind Dalton Schultz at the number 7, and pretty much exactly the opposite as Dalton Schultz is TJ Hawkinson. And I say he's the opposite because TJ Hawkinson is in a far worse situation this year. He has DJ Chark coming onto the Lions. He has Jamison Williams coming onto the Lions. He has DeAndre Swift healthy now. So there's far more options on the offense for the targets to go to. The thing that is nice about TJ Hawkinson and the Lions is that they will be playing from a deficit quite a bit. So they will be throwing the ball quite a bit. But when you compare him to Dalton Schultz, you can get him 20 picks behind where you're getting Dalton Schultz, which is why I've been taking far more TJ Hawkinson than Dalton Schultz. So even though TJ Hawkinson Dalton Schultz has a slight edge on TJ Hawkinson, I have been taking way more because you have to pay a far cheaper price for him. And I think it's very possible they come out with a very similar fantasy points per game at the end of the season. And the reason they're so opposite is the situation is worse for TJ Hawkinson, but the talent I believe in so much more. I think if you drop TJ Hawkinson in Dallas, TJ Hawkinson could be a top 3 tight end, could be top 4 tight end. But he's on the Lions in a worse situation, which is what puts him behind Dalton Schultz in the C tier. Now, last player in the C tier is going to be Dallas Goddard at Philadelphia. Now, the first thing that we want to note with Dallas Goddard is how efficient he is. And he had the number 1 yards per reception or yards per route run of all tight ends last season at 2.9. 2.63 was George Kittle. 2.07 was Travis Kelce. 2.93 yards per route run. So every time he ran a route, he was averaging 3 yards. But the issue here is that the Eagles are a rush-first defense, or a rush-first offense, and they brought in a target hog in both the field stretching option and in the red zone in A.J. Brown this offseason. And not only are they just a running offense, they had the least amount of pass attempts last season at 494. Below the Seahawks, the Saints, the 49ers, the Browns, and the Colts. They had 494 attempts on the entire season, and they brought in A.J. Brown, and Davonte Smith is going to take a step in his second year in the NFL. So although Dallas Goddard is an extremely efficient option, we can't rank him higher than this just because of the opportunity that he's going to be given. So I think he's a very good player to pick, and you can get him in a very respectable range. You can get him pretty low in the draft, and that's why we have been drafting him quite a bit. And if you can get him paired up with Jalen Hurts, I think that's a great way to go ahead and stack your fantasy team. But that's why we have him so low, even with the efficiency rating that he has. So moving on to the first player in the D tier, we're going to go ahead and throw Zach Ertz right behind Dallas Goddard, ironically enough. So you can get Zach Ertz with an ADP value of 108, which puts you into the 9th round, and that leaves you drafting him over players like Devin Singletary, Tyler Boyd, Tim Patrick, and you're going to get an extremely hot start at that 9th round pick at your tight end position, because we have Christian Kirk gone from the offense this year, going to Jacksonville, freeing up 103 targets. D-Hop is going to miss 6 games this year. And Chase Edmonds is gone to Miami, freeing up 53 targets. Now, if we do a little, we can't, before we get ahead of ourselves, we can't take these target totals too literal. But what we can do is play a hypothetical. And what we can do here is take Marquise Brown and drop him right into Christian Kirk's spot. Let's just say Marquise Brown comes in and produces 103 targets for 982 yards. So, boom, Marquise Brown done. A.J. Green's still there. Rondale Moore's still there. James Conner's still there. D-Hop last year had 64 targets with 7 games missed. He's going to miss 6 games this year. So let's just say he's the same as what you see on the screen now. Let's say that's what he produces this year as well. Let's say Chase Edmonds is gone, but Inu comes in and takes that exact same role. And if you consider all those hypotheticals to basically replace the players that left or are going to miss some time and replace them with who they brought in verbatim, and Zach Ertz produces the exact same amount or the exact same efficiency as he did last season, you're going to have him at tight end 6. He finishes at 6th tight end overall, which is a couple spots ahead of where we have him ranked. So even if all of that plays out exactly how we said it, and all of those replacements give us a production that we expect them to, Zach Ertz still has plenty of room to produce at a high level with Kyler Murray in one of the better offenses in the league. Moving on, right below Zach Ertz is going to be our guy, Dawson Knox. And Dawson Knox I have a really hard time with. I knocked him below Zach Ertz, which might be a little different. And honestly, I wanted to knock him down more. And he did finish as the number 8 tight end overall with 9 fantasy points per game. But the problem was that all of his points came from touchdowns. His touchdown efficiency was 8.4%. Now, if we go back and remember, because this is a stat we talked about with Darren Waller earlier on. Darren Waller had a 3.6% efficiency in the end zone. And we're talking about Dawson Knox having, where was it? An 18% touchdown efficiency rating. So 18% of the time he plays a game, he gets a touchdown. And the reason this is so concerning is because we talked about it with Darren Waller. We talked about it with George Kittle. This is a very volatile stat. And this is the first time that Dawson Knox finished as a top 20 tight end this year because of his touchdown efficiency. If you look at his receptions per game, we're talking about 3 receptions per game. If we look at his yards per game, we're talking about 39 yards per game. If we look at his 2020-2019 seasons, he had 288 yards with 3 touchdowns and 388 yards with 2 touchdowns. And so this is a very concerning player to me. I have a hard time drafting him unless I have a Josh Allen stack because you're basically only counting on touchdowns with him. He's not getting used down the field. He's not getting used pretty much anywhere other than the red zone, and that was an outlier. Last year was an outlier because previous years he was not producing in the end zone or throughout the rest of the field. But this is a situation where we close our eyes and we just remember that he's on the Buffalo Bills. That's it. We just remember that he's on the Buffalo Bills. One of the top, I'll call it top 3 offense in the league. We know they're going to be in the red zone. We know they're going to be scoring points. We know that Dawson Knox is going to have the opportunity again. So as much as the stats and the figures point me away and make me want to drop Dawson Knox down the ranks, I can't do it just because he's on the Bills. It's a very scary way to think about it, which is why I'm not drafting him. But I think it's a very real possibility that he finishes right behind Zach Ertz on the season in the 2022 season. I don't want to think about it anymore. It's hard for me to put him there, but we have to. We're moving on from the D tier to the first player in the E tier, which I think is very comparable to Dawson Knox. Very comparable to being a traditional tight end, targeted in the red zone and not really used anywhere else. We're going to put Hunter Henry as our first player in the E tier. Now, he is getting up there in age. He does have all of the red flags that we talked about for Dawson Knox. He did finish the season last year right behind Dawson Knox at the number 9th tight end overall with 9 touchdowns, just like Dawson Knox, 603 yards, not many yards more than Dawson Knox, 75 targets, 4 more targets than Dawson Knox. So almost an identical player here. That's a little bit older, which is why we have him ranked below Dawson Knox. And although he's not on the Bills, the reason we do want to go ahead and put him in the top 11 tight ends is because he is going into a year where, and this is just pretty much all my belief. This is how I think about the Patriots. This is how I think about Bill Belichick. This is how I think about Mac Jones. I believe that Mac Jones was severely nerfed last year. I think that Bill Belichick took a lot of the pass attempts out of the New England Patriots offense to shield Mac Jones' confidence and take the ball out of his hands as much as possible to get him going and win games through his defense and the rushing game until Mac Jones built up his confidence, and built up his NFL production level at the quarterback position. So since we're coming off of Mac Jones' rookie season, I think Mac Jones takes that step. I think the Patriots graduate from 535 passing attempts, which is one of the lowest in the entire NFL. I think we see that bump up to just below 600, giving more opportunities on the offense, giving more opportunities to Mac Jones, and allowing him to make more plays to Hunter Henry. So although Hunter Henry is older, although he has all the red flags that we talked about for Dawson Knox, I think that he has room to take a step as well, just based off of the overall passing offense of the New England Patriots this year compared to last year, and why they didn't have too many pass attempts last year. So I think that the entire Patriots passing game takes a step, and I think Hunter Henry is a direct beneficiary of that. Now, moving on to the 12th tight end overall, we're going to go ahead and throw Pat Freiermuth in the E tier with Hunter Henry. Pat Freiermuth is interesting because first thing to note is Eric Ebron is no longer there, so he doesn't have to compete with Eric Ebron for targets in the tight end position anymore. And we do see a very strong difference from when Eric Ebron was on the field with Pat Freiermuth to when he wasn't. But if you look here, he finished at the 13th tight end spot overall, and this was with 7 touchdowns and 497 yards on the season, which again is very comparable to a Hunter Henry and a Dawson Knox. Not very productive outside of the red zone. They don't use him as a field stretching option at all, or not field stretching option, but they don't use him down the field at all, really. He pretty much is a traditional tight end where he's just a threat in the red zone. But an interesting stat that I saw is obviously we're going from Ben Roethlisberger to Mitchell Trubisky. And something that I did see when looking into Mitchell Trubisky is that when he got 40 yards out of his tight end in a game, Mitchell Trubisky produced with 66.4% completion rate, 2,000 yards on those 8 games that he did have 40 yards from his tight end. And he had 17 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, which is a very elite stat line. Now, that's a very limited stat line because we're talking about 8 games here. But if you think about the tight end options that Mitchell Trubisky had, he really didn't have too many elite tight ends in his tenure in Chicago. So, and I do think that Pat Freiermuth possesses the skill set and the talent to be an elite tight end in this league. So if we're going to try to match Trubisky up with Pat Freiermuth without Eric Ebron, that's something to look at, is that Trubisky does produce when he has a solid tight end. But the thing that I'm a little bit concerned about here is Pat Freiermuth was operating at a 3.8 reception per game, 31 yards per game, 11.7 touchdown efficiency rating stat line last year. And the thing that's really scary is that was with the Steelers attempting the 4th amount of passes on the season compared to all offenses, only behind the Bucks, the Chiefs, and the Chargers. So when he's only producing 497 yards on an offense that is attempting the 4th most amount of passes, that's a little bit concerning because we are going to see I'm sure Mike Tomlin is going to take that overall passing attempts down a little bit when he's putting the offense into Mitchell Trubisky's hands. So I think that the opportunities are going to be less for that reason. And I also think the opportunities are going to be less because we still have Deontay Johnson. We still have Chase Claypool, but we also have George Pickens, who is a really good option in the receiving game. So I don't think they're going to really start using Pat Freiermuth as a receiver anywhere other than the red zone. But I do think that he has a little bit of room to improve his efficiency. I think he has a little bit of room to improve his yardage on the year without Eric Ebron in the offense. I do think he has a little bit of room to improve his amount of receptions per game with Eric Ebron out of the offense because he's not going to be competing against the wide receivers. He's going to be competing against what Eric Ebron was last year. So with all that considered, I do think that Pat Freiermuth has the potential to be the number 12th overall tight end on the season, even though he has Mitchell Trubisky coming in, and they're probably going to pass a little bit less this year. So that's our rankings, and I think these are the tight ends you want to look at when you're going into your league first over any other tight ends. Now, some honorable mentions are players like your Mike Gesicki's. Let's see, who else we have here? I think you can even make a case for a Gerald Everett going into the Chargers. Albert O looks nice. But I don't really think any of those players compare to the ones we have on the screen. And I really do think that you should be considering these players in this order. But, that all said, I would love to hear your opinion in the comments below. If you do like the video, please like the video. It helps me out a lot. Our channel's been doing really well, and we've been progressing day by day, video by video. So everyone that's supporting the channel and has subscribed, thank you. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe or at least consider it. And throw on that notification bell as well because we do live drafts more frequently than these ranking videos. So if you want, you can see when we're live and hop into a draft with us or at least hop into the chat and hang out. Make sure you consider the tight end position a little bit more this year. I know it's boring. I know it's not the exciting pick, but I think it's really worth considering grabbing, especially in a redraft league. I think it's very worth grabbing one of these top 5 tight ends early on in the top 5 rounds probably, and just being set, not having to worry about it. Because when you start getting down into this range, especially after Zach Ertz, a common trend is these guys are very touchdown dependent. So if they're only banking on their fantasy points based off of a touchdown and they're only scoring 9 touchdowns max on the season, you're pretty much screwed for, 8 games? You're screwed for half the games. You have no tight end productivity for half the games, which is very difficult to stomach when you're going up against someone like a Mark Andrews or a Travis Kelce who's producing 15, 16 points per game regardless. So it's all something to consider. Definitely think about taking an elite tight end this year. Again, I really appreciate everyone coming out and checking out the video. And if you have any questions, comments, throw them down below. But until, I want to say maybe Monday, we're looking to get into I think puppy drafts are going to come back on Monday. Cross my fingers. If puppy drafts do come back on Monday, we're going to try to stream those every day until that is filled up. So look for that. But until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. As always, eat some good food, hang out with some friends, some family, and get into some of these underdog fantasy drafts. And I have to say it one time before we get off, if you go on underdogfantasy.com and you do want to get involved into some drafts, your first deposit from $10 to $100 will get matched at 100%. So you put $10 in, they give you $10 right off the bat. And if you use code FFX54, it's above my head and down below. That helps me out, takes nothing away from your match, and would really support the channel greatly. So again, thank you everyone. Have a great weekend. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.